Okay, now, sorry, now go ahead.
Oh, I'm just welcoming Shelley, and we're happy to have her tonight. And if maybe you've looked at her website on Facebook, and you can see beautiful reproductions of all her paintings and all kinds of subject matter, wildlife, still life, landscape. And we just for something different, we thought we'd do the children, and the children are just so charming. How you paint them. So I thought that would be a challenge for all of us, and really great for all of us to see. So, and if you don't know, Shelley's a member of the Canadian Society of Painters in Watercolor, International Watercolor Society, Dundas Valley School of Art, and is it the Niagara Falls Watercolor Society?
Niagara Frontier.
Oh yeah, Niagara. What is that? What does that encompass?
They're in Lockport, New York.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
We've got our neighbors across the border.
Yeah,
Good.
I'm not participating that much right now though.
Yeah. No, that's great. So we'll go ahead and let you get started. And I hope the other thing, I hope everybody received the bulletin through the email through Perry. So you can see we had our last executive meeting, and those are some of the things we came up with, what will be happening. So those pretty much serve as our announcements. If anybody has any questions about any of that. And you got a notice about our September meeting and our October meeting. And sorry about the October meeting was sent out first, which confused everybody. But I think we got it straightened out now. We won't do that again. Okay, thank you, Shelley. It's all yours.
Okay, thanks. Let me just see if I can pin myself here. Shall I spotlight myself?
Yes,
I
please.
can, oh, you can do it or I can do it. Okay, you're
Okay,
good?
here we go. All right, so thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to this. Although it's going to be a real challenge because I'm going to try and get as much as done as I can in the time. But if we run short, at least I'll have the most important part out of the way. So I'm just going to do a little switch over to my demo here. Well, this isn't the demo exactly. This is just an example. So this is another example of a child portrait that I have done. And I wanted to show this for a couple of reasons because, first of all, I want you to maybe notice that I have some blossoms in here, and that's okay. I have lost edges here, and that's okay because you don't even have to finish it to the edges. As long as you get this part in focus and the necessary details in there, you will be able to produce a pretty good likeness. So speaking of likeness, this is the image that I'm going to attempt to do. And this is actually an AI generated child.
Wow.
I do not know this child. This is just something that I got online because it had the correct kind of lighting that I was looking for. Now, if you are setting up your own photography for a portrait of any kind, whether it's a child or not, somewhere near a window is really good because you will get a good shadow on one side, highlight on the other side, and you need both of those highlights and shadows in order to create the forms of the face. And everybody says that the most important thing about a face is the eyes, and yes, they are very important, but more importantly is the forms of the face. So you need to be able to create the right shaped head and cheeks and nose and things like that, or it's simply not going to look like the person. So what I've done is I guess I can move this mic out of the way, but what I've done is I've printed this out the size that I want to paint this because this is my shortcut. If I don't have time to draw it, I will just blow this up and I'll trace it. And I don't consider that a terrible cheat. I do love drawing. As I noticed a few names here, and you'll know that I do like to draw, and I join groups that do drawing. But if I don't have time, this is a nice shortcut. So I've printed this out the size I want to paint it, and I've made a couple of, hopefully you can see this, a couple of little registration marks here. right? Along the edge, I've kind of made like a little X through here in a few places. And that way I can put this back in the exact same place. If I were drawing my own, I probably wouldn't be doing my drawing directly on my watercolor paper. I would do it on a separate piece of like copy paper or something like that, and then I would transfer it. So I use gray graphite paper and I transfer it, and that way I've got a nice clean drawing. My paper's in the best shape for, it's not something that I've been abrasing with an eraser or something like that. So it's in better shape, which is really important when you're trying to do the beautiful skin tones of a child. So now that I've got those little marks on there, I'm just going to remove this. And I want to show you what I have transferred, because there are certain things that if you draw hard lines on your watercolor paper and then you try to do a thin wash over top, of course, those lines are locked in there. You'll never get rid of them. So I'll zoom in a little bit on the face, and I want to show you in particular what I'm going to do with the hair area, because we'll hopefully get to some of that before the end, but I'm going to focus more on the skin tones. But just to give you a start, I'm going to show you what I do. All right, so we all know, oops, sorry, camera wants to zoom in on my hand, not the paper. So we all know that there's this sort of crease, smile crease, that goes around from the nose to the corners of the mouth. And if I did a line there, that line would be very obvious. So there's certain things that you just have to do with your brush. So I didn't make a line on my drawing for that. I only put in the most important lines, and everything else I'm going to do with my brush. But over here in the hair area, you'll notice that what I've done is I've very, very lightly identified where the shadows are within the hair. So I've transferred what I feel is the sort of the ribbons of the hair, so the groupings of hair, not individual hairs, of course. There's no like spaghetti lines or anything like that, but there's this sort of flow to the hair, and I've put that in. And then when you remove your graphite or you remove your image, sometimes it can be really hard to sort out, like, oh, what was that highlight or was that shadow? So I just do this really lightly, and I know that those areas are going to be darker, so it's not going to interfere. What I will do is I will take some paper towel and I will kind of wipe off any excess graphite so that it doesn't smear in my painting, but at least this way I kind of know where I'm going. I have a very light hint there. If I were doing an adult, I would be able to wet the whole face, because generally adults have eyes that aren't really, really white and teeth that aren't really, really white. So I would be able to wet the whole thing. And if some of the skin tones got into the whites of the eyes or the teeth, that's typically okay. But with a child, let me bring this image over here. With a child, you can see her eyes are much whiter than the skin. Now, the highlights in her skin uh, are very pale. Like, children are typically pretty pale, at least Caucasian children are. And so in this case, she's got there's hardly any paint here. So what I'm going to focus on first is where the shadows are. And you'll notice, in order to get that smooth skin, you need to have really softened edges, right? So the softening of the edges is going to be absolutely crucial here. The hair in this case is a little darker than the skin, so I'm going to allow this to go right up into her hairline. In fact, I almost always do that, because you don't want to have a hard line where the skin stops, because the skin actually continues into the hairline, and you don't want to have like a helmet hat on with hair. So let me zoom out a little bit again. And as we go along, if you have questions or if I omit talking about something, please do mention it. You can either unmute and ask your question, or put it in the chat, and one of the hosts here will let me know that there's a question. So I'm going to not wet the eyes. She's not smiling with her teeth, so I don't need to worry about that. But I will wet the mouth because I don't want her to look like she's got wax lips either. So I'm just going to take a soft brush, and I think it's really good if you have a soft brush because a softer brush is less abrasion on the paper. When I'm painting, I tend to use a really light touch, like a feather touch. So important to keep your paper in good shape. So, no, really. So this is Arches 140-pound cold press paper that I'm going to be using. And I'm going around the eyes, and I'm using really light touch. And what I'm looking for here is a nice uniform application of water. And you'll see me kind of leaning to one side or the other. So I'm looking to make sure I haven't missed any spots, but I also am looking for the kind of finish, like how much water am I actually putting on? And I'm putting it on so that it's pretty wet right now because I want to let some of that soak in. I don't want her skin tone to go into her straps of her dress, so I'm going to paint around that. And you'll see me loading my brush again and again and again, and that's because I just want to make sure that I've got lots of water on here, because I know this is super thirsty paper. It's cotton paper. And I'm fond of Arches papers because it seems to be the most durable in terms of layering. At least that's the most durable that I've come across. So, you know, I can layer and the paper doesn't start to break down, pill, or anything like that. So I want to make sure that things are staying in good shape. You notice I'm going back over a few things. I'm trying to keep the consistency uniform all the way through here. And that's enough for me to work on. I could do her shoulders and her arms right now as well, but I'm just going to let that start soaking into the paper while I prepare my paint. So I'm using artist quality paints, and I always think that that makes a big difference. But I want to make a color that's going to resemble her cheek shadow tones, you know, the areas within her neck and, you know, this side of her face and that sort of thing. But I have to remember, if I'm painting on wet, it is going to be way lighter. So I'm going to have to go with something a little darker, not as runny, because I'm working on wet. If I have really runny paint and a really wet surface, it really won't have much control. So for her skin tones, I want to go with, I can just use some primary colors here. So I'm going to use, instead of a bright yellow, I'm going to use a raw sienna. I will use a, let's use a permanent alizarin crimson. All right, so a pinker red. And I'm going to go with cerulean. So I'm going to go with kind of primary colors here. Keep this as simple as possible. And I want to mix some of my red into my raw sienna, which of course is making a really orangey color, and I want to brown it down a little bit. So if I take a little of the cerulean, put that in, now I have something much more toned, much more less vibrant. Okay, so I don't want that to be a really wet puddle, but I do think I need more of it. So let me just mix a little more. And I'm not picking up a lot more water because I know that if I make this too watery, I won't have any control. Plus, I'll end up having to do far too many layers. Okay, so I've rinsed my brush. Move some of those out of the way. And I am using a paper towel. And when I'm painting, I tend to use my paper towel like almost like another brush that is drier because I just keep blotting it and blotting and blotting all the time. I'm always conscious, how wet is my brush? How wet is my paper? So what I'm looking for on the surface of my paper is kind of a leathery shine. Okay, so it's sort of a leathery shine. I've got a little dripping going on here, so that might still be a little bit wet. So I'm just going to take another brush here just to redistribute this water to make it even. I don't want to have drips anywhere, but I want to have that sort of satin shine. All right, so very light touch. I don't want to abrase the paper any more than absolutely necessary. All right, so now you can see it's got a good shine. I wouldn't call that glossy anymore. That is more of a satin shine, you know, like when you buy paint for your walls, comes glossy or semi-gloss. This is more semi-gloss. And so I'm going to go in, I'm going to blot my brush here. This is a round squirrel hair brush that I'm using here, but I could be using a flat as well. As long as I'm using it lightly as I apply this. And I'm going to be really observing every little stroke that I put on here. I notice that it's darker here. This is sort of the core part of the shadow. It actually gets a little more reflected light on her chin line. So I'm not going to take the darkest area at the line that I put on. I'm going to come in from there. But before I do, I'm just going to test my color. I'm going to thin it out because, of course, if I'm painting on something wet, that's what it's going to end up being. And I'm just checking to see. I probably could put a touch more blue into it. It's a little bit too lively yet for a shadow. So I'm going to put just a little more blue into this. Hopefully I didn't go too far. If I did, I'll just get some more of my other colors and add them in. Let's So I'm finding that's a pretty good match there. So I'm going to go with that. Paper towel in hand. And off we go. So you need the shine on the paper. You'll know immediately when you touch the paper if things are going to move too far or not far enough. And it looks like I'm in pretty good shape. So bring the picture over so I can really see exactly where it's going. And coming in with this cheek area, some of her chin. Now, while the paper's wet, I'm going to have to work fairly quickly here because this is a window of time that I can work in. The window doesn't stay open as long as I would like. It never does, but I want to get in what I can. So I'm painting very, very lightly. And one thing I haven't mentioned yet is that sometimes if things start drying on me and I'm just not ready to stop, or I need to soften up some lines or something like that, having a flat brush like this that's just a little damp is a great help. So if I were to just take a little moisture off that. You see, I can soften a line quite nicely. Let me move this down just a smidge. But I can just, and I'm hardly touching the paper with this, but I can soften up things as I'm going along. So, sometimes when you put your paint on, it wants to crawl in different directions that aren't really expected. And this is a great way to kind of smooth that out. And I can get something pretty soft here. I won't worry about too much softness just at this stage. As I'm building up layers, every layer is going to like kind of smooth things out a little bit anyway. So I'm just going to worry about softening or getting my shadows in here. So I'm coming in close to the eye, not quite at the eye, but then I'll rinse my brush, but make sure I blot it if I want to sort of spread that out and help it to disappear into that surface. Having the paper wet first, though, sure makes a big difference. And I'm just going to go as far as I can until my paper says, I just want to dry. And you'll know when your paper's telling you that, because you'll start getting a bunch of hard lines that you're not really wanting. That little indent over the lip here, that's called the philtrum, I believe. That's got a little indent, so you've got this little peaks and valleys on the sculpture of the face. So I like to think of this as almost like carving, and I'm carving the shapes of the face. Like I have to sort of dig in or make a shadow where the crease of the eye is. Didn't get as soft as I wanted, so I'm grabbing this brush and I'm just going to tickle that very lightly with that brush, and I'm able to soften that. So I'm going to do just a little more here. Okay, so I just made a hard line. And so I'm going to run this over that spot so that I get something much softer. And that took care of that. On the other side, there's a little bit of shadow from her hair. This little edge here. Plus, you've got the roundness of the forehead, so we want to create that roundness. I want to put a little bit of shadow there. It's not as dark as on the right-hand side, but it is an important part as well. So I'm going to make sure it's damp enough before I put the paint on here. So I'm just going to brush on here. The middle of the paper, like the core of the paper, is already drying. Or, I mean, I shouldn't say it's already drying. The surface is drying, but the core of the paper is still a little damp because I haven't taken a dryer to it or anything like that. So that brush is a little too wet. I'm able to come in and do this. But I really want to keep an eye on these edges. So it's the edges of your strokes that you really want to keep very soft on a child's face. And when I'm doing a portrait of a child, I end up doing sometimes many, many layers. This is why I like the cotton paper, because it allows me to layer up, because the first layers sink into the absorbent cotton paper. Whereas if you use a student quality paper or a pulp type of paper, the first layers tend to sit on top a little bit more. And then you go to wet it again and they start moving around a lot more. So using a cotton paper is going to make a tremendous difference. I want to use a little bit of this red, um, just to red up this color a little bit more for the other side, because we've got her cheek here, and her other cheek, I should say. Dampening this. And a little too wet, spreading too far. So I'm always conscious, how wet's my brush, how wet's my paper? It's like an ongoing battle. It's something you kind of have to concentrate on. Now that's a little messy, right? So let's take this brush. Smooth out all those shapes. And you see, you can actually control it as long as you don't allow it to dry. It's surprising how much control you can actually get. Now, it doesn't look spectacular right now. You're going to get a point in your painting where, you're going to question whether or not you should even continue because it's going to look terrible. You all know that feeling, right? And so I'm going to get a little bit more over on this side, and then I'm going to go down into her neck area. So I want to get her ear in shadow here. It goes into the hair a little bit. That won't bother in this case because it's the hair is going to be darker. So now I'm coming back down to the neck area, and I want to get some of the shadows there. So I'm going to come under the chin so it doesn't bleed up into her face. Her face isn't completely dry yet, but it's not going to bleed up into there if it's almost completely dry. Or if the surface is quite a bit drier, it shouldn't bleed too far. It didn't take as much water there to re-wet that because so much of it was still in the middle of the paper. A little bit of lint. So the right side of her neck is obviously darker. That's where I'll start. If I were a sculptor, I would not be carving eyes until I actually created the eye sockets. So I'm thinking of my watercolor in the same way. You can't carve the lips until you create the ins and outs of, under the nose and so on. So I'm trying to observe the lights and darks here. There's like a triangular shape that comes down here. And then across her collarbone. You can see a few brush marks there, right? But that's not something I need to be overly concerned with. As long as things are still wet, I can bring that into control, blot the flat brush. And if you hold the brush sort of on the end here, instead of choking up on it, but if you do this, you're probably going to put too much pressure. But if you hold it way back here, you're only going to be able to apply light pressure. So if I just sort of lightly pull it across before that dries, I'll be able to really level out some of those brush marks. Some of them will level out on their own as the paint dries, but you can't just count on that, right? So I'm trying to get it as sort of smooth and consistent as I can before I kind of abandon it. So I still got some nice control over here. So I'm going to put a little bit more shadow here. Because by now you all know that values are more important than color. I'm still going to have to build up some of this, but I really want to make sure that I am figuring things out. So this is a little bit like a ghost version of this, but it's helping me to get familiar with and identify where all of the forms are. Okay, so trying not to get onto her yellow shirt or yellow dress or whatever. And okay. So some of it bled up into her hair. That's not actually anything to worry about. But if I wanted to remove it, I'd just blot my brush and I could run that blotted brush, and it better be blotted or you're going to make a blossom. I could just run that along there and basically clean that up. Okay, so I will just sort of continue on with a few places. I'll revisit. I'm kind of jumping around, of course, because I have to allow some things to dry or get dry enough that they're not going to move when I do what I'm doing right now, brushing water over top of it. Okay, let's soften this a little more. Now, obviously, there's going to be some adjustments that are going to happen as I'm going along. So I'm going to, while I'm waiting for that to dry, I can move along into the hair area and start to put in some shadows where where I've marked them. So if I were to wet this area, for example, her hair is more brown, so I'm definitely going to have to add more blue into this mix for this to work. Okay, I've made my two primaries, then I darken it or dull it with the third. You don't want to do these all in equal quantities or you'll really have a muddy painting. So I'm going to come in and it's pretty dark through here. Ooh, that was very, very wet. So I'm just going to blot my brush and spread that out so that that doesn't turn into a problem. Not that it's really a problem at this stage, but I want to make sure that I am not letting it just have its own way. I have a crisp edge up here that I probably didn't dampen enough. So I'm just going to run this brush along, and it will blend into the background. I'm not worried about that. This needs more blue. She's not a redhead, she's a brunette. And by adding the blue, this has become much more brown. Once again, I've got an edge that's a little too stark. So I take my damp brush and I just run it along there. I don't really mind if the edge of her hair completely disappears. As the other example I showed you, it doesn't even have to be completed. I could just leave it blended right into the background. So I'm going to continue softening. If I don't want it to bleed too far, I make sure this brush isn't overly wet. I just want a little softening. And I will have to keep cleaning it so that I'm not transferring colors. Following the direction of the hair so that any brush marks that end up showing, I want them to be in the direction of the hair flow. And so I'm going to take a little more cerulean because I'm coming into some of these darker shadow areas. And I want to make sure that those are established. Oh, I hit a dry spot. So I will have to come in and soften that. I started developing this way of painting when I was teaching and before the electronics and so on. And I had everybody coming up to the front of the classroom to gather around. And I wasn't quite finished what I was doing, and I didn't want to eat up their painting time by pulling out the hair dryer and all of that kind of stuff. So I developed this way of painting in order to sort of keep going. A little lighter in some of these areas. And I often get asked, why don't I just use a spray bottle to keep going? This being partly dry would end up all speckled, and I would get this speckly texture on everything if I were to do that. So unfortunately, spraying is not the best solution here. Just mixing a little more color here because I'm getting a little low. But this isn't, just because I'm mixing new color doesn't mean I want to make a wet puddle. I know when you're rinsing your brush in between colors, sometimes you can end up with a puddle that's more runny than you need. So I want this a little more blonde. I'm going to use a little bit more raw sienna. A little less red in there. I just want a little bit more raw sienna. And that's getting a bit dry. So I'm struggling a little bit more with this because I'm trying to get a bit more color down due to time. But normally I would just take my time with this, and I would put a layer on, work somewhere else, put another layer on, let drying in between, and all of that. Just wetting this. So where I did the darker pencil lines, I can make that darker, and I'm exaggerating things right now. They're not going to stay this dramatic by the time I build a few layers up, but this is going to make it a lot easier for me to identify it at a glance. So it's the hair groupings that I'm more paying attention to here. Or raw sienna where it's a little lighter. So by marking those lights and darks off, I can see how the flow of the hair is actually going to happen. And it's messy at this stage. This is typical of the beginning of a painting. And if this part doesn't get the appropriate attention that it needs in terms of sculpting the forms, uh, you're kind of building on a weak foundation. So I'm just trying to keep this ear shape nice for now, but it's the groupings that I'm more concerned with right now. So I'll go to the other side where it's very blonde. So that means much thinner color. And I'm going to wet this area. I don't want her hair bleeding into her skin tones, so I am not wetting her face here. It will have a harder line on that edge of her face. And you see, I'm going out into the background. That little bit of pencil line's not going to show, so I'll be okay. Now this is going to be a lot lighter, so I'm using a lot more raw sienna for this. There's a couple of areas of extra dark, which I'll go into. can put my hand, I was just checking to make sure I wasn't going to put my hand in wet color here. It's damp, but I can put my hand on it, or my arm on it. So those extra darks, they're up much closer to her face. But things start to get a real golden tone once they get beyond the right next to her face. So I'm going to overlap some of this with some blonde. Taking care along her jawline there so I don't get a wobbly jaw. And also her neckline. I have to be careful of those shapes in particular. I have to watch. I'm the kind of artist who likes to work the whole painting. I know there's some people who basically want to finish one section. I like to work the whole painting because I like to, everything I feel is in relation to the next thing in order for the whole thing to work together nicely. So I will work the whole painting all at once. So that includes hair and skin tone. So it's always bigger shapes and then narrow down to smaller shapes. Really following every curve and her like wave in her hair just to establish the flow. If you're not aware, I actually have a YouTube channel. I don't know if you're all familiar with that, but I have a couple of tutorials on portraits, not always children, of course, but other portraits. Specifically things like smiles or hair, blonde hair, for example. And so I do talk about my approach just with a focus on one specific topic, which is good and not good because, like as I said, I usually like to work the entire painting all together, if at all possible. But so as I'm going and I'm checking my photo just to see, okay, there's this blonde hair, a little darker underneath. So I have to create that overlap look just with a little bit of shadow there. As it comes back into the light, it's going to get a little bit more golden again. And this side being light, like in the sunshine, it definitely needs a thinner application of color as opposed to like a really dark puddle over here on my palette. Getting a bit dry down there, so just gonna get a little more on here and get out of this danger zone. Once things start drying, it's a little dangerous to keep working. So if I need to stop, I will. Eight 21. Okay. So I want to come back to the face. That gives you some idea of the building up of the hair. I got a little bit too red over here, but this is going to end up being a lot darker, so I'm not really too worried about that. I've got some marks in here that maybe aren't as smooth as they need to be. Subsequent layers are definitely going to smooth some of those things out. And the more layers you build up, the more you can soften those under layers, and they will redistribute the paint so that it'll be more even. But you'll notice I left a kind of a gap up here. When I'm doing a little bit more texture on the hair, when I get to that point, I like to use a big a natural hair brush, like um, and I'll splay the bristles. So basically on my palette, I will kind of give it a little rub like this, which splays out the bristles, and that leaves the brush in that kind of shape. I'm not pressing really hard. It's just enough to sort of get them to separate. And it's going to allow me to get a little bit of hair texture here. So to transition into that highlight, I can do that pretty easily and get a fairly natural look to the hair by doing that. That type of thing. So just having a splayed out brush, I find looks a lot more natural than using something like a fan brush. The fan brush, they're all a little too evenly spaced, and they're all too lined up with each other. And to me, it doesn't feel as natural. So when it comes down into the hair, you can start to do that. Now, I would not develop this hair until I had the facial features, or at least the skin tone of the face, especially the forehead, completed. So I'm going to come back to that. But just going to give this a quick dry. Just around the face area, because that's where I want to work. This is a heat tool, by the way. It's a Ranger heated tool. I bought it on Amazon. It looks like a hair dryer, but it's actually a heat tool, and it gets really hot. So you got to keep it moving. I only use it if I'm really under the gun to keep moving. I really prefer when the paint sort of softens and dries naturally, so that it'll have an even more blended look. As soon as you take the dryer to it, it kind of stops the process. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give her an overall color for her face. And I'm going to switch it up sometimes, a little more pink here on the cheek, perhaps a little more cerulean blue down here under the neck or something like that, and that sort of thing, so that I can get a better feel for then this weird image, this ghost image here. So I'm going to wet once again. I'll just use this big brush that I've got in my hand, and I'm going to go into the hair. It won't matter, but I'm still working around the eyes. Having dried that, those colors aren't moving. So I used to think that if I didn't get it on right in the first try, that's it. That's my only chance, because I thought all of it would move if I got it wet again. But of course, I was using inexpensive paint, inexpensive paper, and not the best quality, and I wasn't able to successfully layer things. So I cannot emphasize enough how important the paper is. Let me know in the chat if you agree with that. Actually, have we got a chat? We do. Okay, so let's see. Oh, mostly hellos. Okay. You guys don't have questions for me. Still using a really light touch. I don't want to abrase the paper in any way. Need to make sure I'm not missing any spots because that's going to look really weird. All right, so let's take a little bit of color here. Let's just test the waters. Blotting my brush so it's not overly wet, but she's got this little bit of pink on her face. Pink over here. So I'm going to revisit a lot of areas just to build them up and get them a little darker. Every time I do another layer, I become a little more familiar with my subject. I find things that I probably have missed on the first time around, and I can start getting into the more specific areas. So at first, you're just thinking about the general shape, the biggest areas, and then you can start to fine tune a little bit more. But one thing to keep in mind is how much lighter it's going to end up. It always ends up far lighter than I ever expect. Got a little cleft chin, not much, just a little bit here. Not a cleft chin. What did they call that? The dimpled chin? I used the wrong word, I think. Have my brush handy in case I need to soften things as I go. And I'm just pulling it along the surface to soften things up. She's got a little glow underneath her chin. So I'm going to use a little more raw sienna under there. So even in this little area here, you can see variations in these shadows and the feeling of glow that comes from adding that golden tone. Okay, I'm going to get my flat brush, smooth some of this out. And then as I build my layers, it looks a little funny right now, but as I build my layers and put like a general wash over all of this, this all just kind of becomes a little more homogenized, and it just starts to melt together a little bit more and look a lot smoother. Okay. So I'm going to go with a little bit more coloring on her forehead up here. So I'm getting rid of more white paper. I'm not sure I want to get rid of all of it, but I want to get rid of a lot more of it. And she looks pretty creepy so far. But I'm going to come in and give a little bit of a, when it gets to this stage, I always have to put a little something in there just to give myself a direction of where it's going. So I'm going to deal a little bit with the eyes and the lips and things like that, the shape of the nose, etc. Actually, I might do the nose right now. So around the nostrils, it's a little more pink. She has a little ball on the end of her nose, so that's going to have a little bit of highlight on it and shadow. So I'm bringing a little pink under there. The side of her nostril here. And I'm definitely using some more pink for her lips. Really pale on the light side of, where the sunlit side is. If you go too dark there, it can often look like she's wearing her mom's lipstick. Um, at least, all of a sudden you don't want to have it like a bright, bright pink. Some kids have these gorgeous pink lips and so on, that naturally pink. But at this early stage, you don't want to make it overly red. You could really take it too far. So you'll see sometimes I'm using the chisel edge, I guess, of my round brush here to get along that opening of the mouth a little bit better. A little pink in a few more places. So around the nostrils, where the skin is thin, fingertips have a little more pink. Around the nostrils, the cheeks and things like that, there's always a little bit more pink. So people will often say to me, like, what color do you mix for your skin tones? Well, all of them. So I'm using a very limited palette here, but I'm trying to sculpt using not just value, but I'm also using color temperature in order to create effects such as whether there's like this reflected light, or making the paint really thin to show a light hitting and a certain raised area and that sort of thing. Now I feel like I'm almost at the point where I'm going to have to dampen it again. But I think I can do a little bit more before that happens, before I get too crazy here. I'm going to go a little bit more golden again. Once on this lower chin, she's got some reflected light. A little bit of glow on her skin really brings some life to the portrait. I see an awful lot of people, because they're working on a wet surface, that they're brushing far too much and things are becoming too homogenized. They're layering up like all three colors all together rather than placing them more side by side. I deliberately left a spot for this golden color. Then I deliberately left a spot for pink here, more of the brown on the darker side, etc. So I'm not just looking at the value, I'm also looking at what type of a shadow it is. And you may have to hunt a little bit for these colors because a lot of photos will just tend to make it all look the same. And you can always tell a painting that's been done directly from a photo if it's all flat like that. You can tell that they've worked from a photo. But if you're working from a photo and you have that knowledge, then you can compensate for it. So you know that you can change things up a little bit to understand what's in the light and what's in the shadow. So on this earlobe, if I put a little bit of pinker golden color here on the tip, or the lower part of her earlobe, and then I switch to a darker color that's a little cooler, maybe a little bit more blue in it, I can really create the effect that that ear is in shadow. Now I need to soften that for sure, but very light touch. And so this is the sort of buildup that I do, and it can take me a really long time because when I'm sitting down to do a portrait, I am, I want it to look right. So I will take my time and I'll build it very slow. Obviously, I'm going to carry the similar effect down into her neck and shoulders. But I'm just going to do a little bit around her face just in case we don't get that far. I'll come back and revisit it if there's time, but I want to cover as much ground as possible. So her eyes are this wonderful blue color. She has a nice sparkle in her eyes. So there's a highlight that I need to work around. But in terms of the white of the eye, I want to, I don't want to make it a bright blue. I want to make it a little bit more gray, but lots of blue in it and really quite thin. I don't have to wet the area first. It's far too small to bother with that nonsense. So I'm just using a very barely any color kind of thing for her eye. But I want to see if I can locate an area within the white of the eye where it's a little darker or lighter. So there's a little highlight in that eye. And so many people want to leave the white of the eye really white. It's almost unfortunate that they call it the white of the eye because everybody wants to leave it white. But it's actually, even on a child, it's going to be kind of this blue color. Now that looks creepy, but by the time I actually get the iris on, which is much darker, it's going to look fine. But making the eye a little bit blue and leaving a little highlight on the white of the eye for a little bit of light reflecting on it, it helps it make it look like a wet surface. And it's definitely darker on this side. Now, I really didn't have to go around the iris. I really could have gone right through that, but just so you could understand where I was working, I went around the iris. But if I was doing this on my own, I'd have just gone through. Feels too dark, right? All right, let's try that. Gonna let that cool down while I darken the nostrils. Now you notice I went right in on dry here. It's because now I need a specific shape. So I'm putting this dark in here that has a lot more blue in it, a little more pigment, of course. And then I'm switching to a little bit more pink. Bringing some more pink tones in it so that it doesn't look like somebody just drilled a hole, that it's rounded, right? So it's a smooth transition that, that shape around the nostril is like a roll. Like if you took a towel and rolled it, it's similar to that. So I want to be able to create that effect. And now to a little bit of pink. So you're going to notice a trend as you're painting a portrait, and that is that if your shadows are cool, they're pretty much cool everywhere. If and there's in red tones or reddish brown tones, things like that, tend to be the transitional color before it gets a little bit more golden in the light. Now, of course, the exception to that is going to be somebody with really dark complexion, like somebody who's black, and their skin would be much darker. And sometimes they'll get a reflection of their highlights might actually be blue because it might be reflecting the sky if they were outside. Dark skin is probably more reflective, I think, than Caucasian skin. So that is something to be looking out for. Try not to paint your paintings like it's a formula, like, oh, Shelley said to use this color, or that this is how it goes. Well, that's how it's going this time and most times, but it's, there's exceptions to every single rule. Okay, so I'm putting a mark on, but I'm immediately softening it and trying to uh, get the shape right. Putting a mark on. And so you notice I'm not wetting the area first now that I'm working somewhere smaller. Now that I'm working smaller, I'm just putting on a little color and immediately softening it as I go, because if I wet it, I can't get the little nuances that I'm looking for. So I rinse and I blot my brush, and then, I soften the edge that I need softened. Definitely need some more color going here. That was a lot of color, so need to immediately spread that and soften it. But little by little, you can see all these layers that they start to become fine tuning. And that's what I'm really looking for here, is to start fine tuning all these shapes. Darken up where it needs darkening. And sometimes it takes me quite a while, quite a few layers in order to get this darkened enough that I feel like my values are correct. And if values are always sort of your nemesis, I would strongly recommend softening up your paints before you start painting so that they are uh, gooey, like they are out of the tube. If I were to take a completely dry palette and start rubbing my brush, it would take me a really long time to get a good strong color or to get rich color. And then you go to the next one, and maybe your next one is a little gooey because you used it a few minutes ago, and then nothing's the same, right? So if I'm trying to keep everything the same, I'm trying to keep the surface of the paper, a consistent dampness as I'm working wet on wet. I'm trying to keep my paints predictably gooey, if you will. I'm always thinking about how much moisture is in my brush, and I've become it's become a habit of mine just to remove excess moisture onto my paper towel as I'm working, and that for me that is the way that I am controlling how much water and or paint. Okay, I'm coming into the eyes. I think I want to get into these eyes. Now this is definitely going to be more blue, cerulean blue I'm using. Now this of course always is my favorite part, is getting some eyes in there, but of course they won't look complete until you get those ridiculously perfect eyelashes on there. It's like my granddaughter has these eyelashes that go for miles. It gets a little more golden, so here's my raw sienna coming in. Oop, that's a little bit too much. So let's get back to my blue. And those two colors can sort of melt together. And I'll definitely have to make this darker, but at least I've got something I can build on. Okay, no pupil yet. I much prefer to leave the white of the paper uh, rather than using white paint to put the highlight in the eye. Switching to a little bit of the um, raw sienna. The iris always has this darker rim around it. And I found out that that rim around your eye actually gets a little more gray as you get older, as if it's not bad. It's bad enough that your hair gets gray, so does the iris. Okay, so you can already see a little life in the eyes, especially with the highlight. She won't look like she's looking up quite as much until I get a little bit more on here, but I transferred it using the photo, so I know it's accurate. But the tear duct, I need to get a nice pink color in there. So I'm going to come in here and get this little tear duct in here. And that little bit of red comes up into up along the eyelash line. That it's just a little bit pink along there. I'm still using this big brush, but it has a pretty good point if I'm using a light touch, and I can actually get a surprising amount of detail out of it. I find it very versatile, actually, these round brushes.
Shelley, one of the artists would like to know exactly what kind of brush that is. Like, is it a dagger or is it just a pointed round?
It's a round brush. It's a squirrel hair round brush. It's actually a travel brush. The handle comes off, and you can take it with you.
Okay,
Oh,
thank
I
you.
dropped it. Yeah, it's just a travel brush, and it's squirrel hair, which is a natural hair brush, but it's not expensive. It's not like Kolinsky, which is, I mean, they don't make actual Kolinsky brushes anymore, but you know how some natural hair brushes are really expensive. This is quite inexpensive. I think I got a set of 4 for like $35. Now that was quite a while ago, but even so, for 4 brushes that I absolutely love, I use them all the time. It's pretty good. So
Awesome, thank you.
you're very welcome. So let me see here. I'm going to put a little hint of her other ear over here, just because it's bothering me. A little bit of color here for her ear. That's okay, getting carried away here. There we go. All right, so eventually I'm going to move along like that. But when it comes to things like the eyebrows, the eyelashes, the creases in the eye, and that sort of thing, I'm going to try not to do those things like one little fine line or every hair by hair. So first I'm going to get um, a little softened eyebrow on there. So to do that, I'm going to dampen this area. I want to get a nice brown going here. It's actually a pretty dark brown, so I'm just lightly going to hint before I actually try to do individual hairs. I'm going to hint at this. Again, it's that ghost version of what I want to end up with. And the reason that I'm doing this is because if I were to simply do hair by hair, because, I did say you could put your details around your face, but if I just put the individual hairs on her light skin tone, they're really going to look stark, right? I'm going to build up too much contrast. So in order to keep the softness of her eyebrows, to make her look like a child, and I do this with adults as well, by the way, but in order to keep the softness in these eyebrows, I'm going to first come in with just a little, say, shading on the placement of those. So something just to hint at that. I'm eating up all my colors here, so I'm going to have to build a little bit more color. And I want to work on her mouth, the opening in her mouth. And in particular, I'm looking at the corners of her mouth. I may soften some of the corners of her mouth, but a lot of people will bring it to an absolute point at the corners of the mouth. But it's like, when you take your thumb and like, this is not just a point. There's like a bunching up of the skin there. And the same thing happens with your mouth because your skin around your mouth is very stretchy. So there's like this little gap here. Plus the upper lip usually protrudes a little more than the lower lip, usually, not always. And in this case, it's pretty equal because she is looking up. But I want to put a little extra dark right there. Let's make it a little more red, I think. So you wouldn't expect that extra dark at the edge. Now I've made that quite dark, but let's soften this now. And then of course there's going to be these little creases, and these are going to be like super subtle. Like, we sure don't want this little child to start looking old like she has wrinkles. But she's got a little smile there. And as we build up the lip color, that won't look nearly as stark. But it's good sometimes to get a dark color in here, sort of at this stage of the game, because if you're working in a full value range, Um, and you're only working from light to dark. You don't even know where the destination is, where your darkest darks are going to be. So it doesn't hurt to put a couple of those in early so that you can base more of your mid values on that and get an overall balance that is much more accurate. So that would be things like the ear canal, I guess, in here, that sort of thing. Now, I don't want that to be just a stark edge there, so let's soften some of this, and I might even go around the outsides. Like all these little things like your ear and everything, none of it's going to have a hard edge because everything's like a rolled up blanket, um, or like a pool noodle that's rounded. Everything's rounded. Um, so the creases in the eyes, those are quite dark. I'm just going to rinse and blot my brush and just brush that over top. So I've got my dark line, but it's not harsh. It will still be a line, a recognizable line. You'll know that it's a crease, but it will be not too much like I just took a Sharpie and put that in there. Rinse and blot. And of course, she's going to look a lot better once she gets a pupil in her eye. The pupil is always central in the iris area. When the head is turned, that may change a little bit, but when somebody's facing you, this is always in the center. It never actually moves. It's the only reason that it's not in the center when the head is turned is perspective. So that's the only reason for that. Okay, so I'm just going to work a little bit on the eyes here for a few minutes, just to show you the development of all these shapes and how they will eventually kind of come together. So I'm darkening this outer part of the eye. And typically I would develop more of the shadow around the eye. So I'm going to, just looking at my time here, I think I've got time to do a little bit around the eye before I actually,
That would be great to see, Shelley. Thanks.
I'm going to develop this because you don't want to be putting the eyelashes on and then trying to do shadows behind an eyelash after the eyelashes are already on. So don't get ahead of yourself. You need to do these things in a particular progression. Little undissolved piece of something there. And you'll just have to play with the ratios of these colors to get the right the right combination. But keeping it in 3 colors will make everything harmonious because you're not really picking a new color every time you go over to your palette. You're still using the same colors so that, of course, everything is going to go together properly when you're using a limited palette. So I'm building up a little bit more around the around here. I'm really trying to maintain the lightness in some areas. Some areas that are protruding need to be kept lighter in order for that to feel like it's coming forward. Other areas are, of course, darkened. Quickly rinsing to soften all of these edges. All the time, especially with a child, boy, stuff has to be soft. It's an ongoing battle to keep up with the softening of the edges, but take your time with it, and you'll manage just fine as long as you're not feeling too impatient. Which is a little tricky for me since I'm chasing a deadline right here. But hopefully I'm getting the point across anyway. But this, I feel like this just needs to be a lot darker right through here. That was a little wet. So if you put something on and it's like, uh-oh, that was too wet, react quickly. Don't wait for it to dry. So I'm coming in to lift anything where it's spread, where I didn't want it, right? I didn't want it to come into this eye too much, too far into the nose. I can use my blotted brush to kind of rein that back in. That was my special finger brush there. Now this is getting pretty wet, and I always end up with a very dirty left hand because usually I leave that on the table, but I wanted you to see what I was doing, so so I had it on camera. But I think I'll dry this eye, and I will develop that a little bit, and I'll do a little bit on the lip.
We're good, and if someone's anxious to go, they can go, but I think this is wonderful, and we're all appreciating it, Shelley.
Oh, good, good. So while that's cooling off, I'm just going to go and do a little bit on the lip. So we need to definitely create more darkness on the lip. So I'm using pretty diluted color here because I want to go easy. And I'm using a permanent alizarin crimson, which is permanent has been developed because regular alizarin crimson is a little bit fugitive. So they've created a permanent alizarin crimson for that purpose. I'm really watching for where the highlights are on her lips. A little darker towards the corners of the mouth. And depending on your reference picture, you may want to, you may need to soften the edges of the lip. Too much of a sharp line here is really going to make it look like she's got wax lips. So you don't want that. Or some sort of weird lip liner for a 4-year-old. But so when I get to the stage where I'm actually adding in things like lashes and things like that, if the lashes happen to be quite dark, it's a little bit more expedient for me to take something like a little neutral tint and use that. So I would use a small brush for those kinds of details. Let me see. So this is a brush. I usually keep the end on it because I need to keep it from getting wrecked. It's a longer liner type brush. It's like a script liner type thing. And I'm going to use some neutral tint for her lashes. Although her lashes are a little brown, so I'm going to put a little raw sienna into that to make it a little bit more brown, so it's not so black like mascara. We still want her to look like a child. I think I'll put a little red in it as well. So now I really need to look to see. Now she is looking up, so we don't have that effect where when somebody's looking at you, and you may get this with a child, is that their lashes are so long that when they're looking right at you, they kind of swoop down before they move up again. And sometimes that will come down over the eyelash or over the eye, the white of the eye or the iris of the eye. So the thing is I would not go too dark with this. It can end up looking very very strange if you have like this really stark contrast. Now that really could be darker in that crease, so you're going to pretend that that's darker there. And they are grouped together. They're not all the same length, even though they kind of look that way in this computer-generated image. There's usually short and long because your eyelashes are constantly growing. So as one falls out, a new one grows in. They're not all going to be the same length, of course. I'm usually painting root to tip. And they're not lined up like soldiers. They will kind of come together. So they just naturally do because of the moisture in your eye. So there's going to be a little bit of crisscrossing of these eyelashes. A little bit. Not too severe, of course. But if you want them to look natural, they should crisscross a little bit. The lower lashes are very short. The eye lid is rounded like this. The lower lid is rounded. So where they come out here is a different direction than when they come out here. If you understand what I mean. lower lid wraps around the eyeball. So these ones will curl this way. Then they get straighter and then they start to go towards the corner of the eye, that type of thing. Now, clearly, you could spend a whole lot of time working on this and developing things to a much greater degree. But the most important thing for a child is getting this skin tone and getting the smoothness of it. So I won't paint on her anymore, but I'll show you one that I was working on, if I can find it. Whoa. Okay, so this is one that I was working on, and it's a lot more developed, obviously. And so
Whoa.
lots more layers, that sort of thing. I actually had to do quite a few layers to build that one up. And boy, it looks red on the screen. It's not quite that red, but
Wow.
uh, but you can see, it was just lots and lots of layers to get everything as smooth as I've got it. Uh, hopefully, hopefully that gives you some idea of my method at least. And yeah, so she's on her way, but she's got a long way to go. And uh, so I can answer questions and paint a little bit more unless you have a
Well,
little
it's
bit of
truly,
business
truly
over there.
amazing. To start with, when you can scroll through the many compliments that are there, Shelley, people have loved this.
Oh, well,
There
thank you.
are a couple of questions coming in here at the end.
Okay.
For someone that, first of all, beautiful work, Shelley. They're all like that. This has been stunning. For
Oh,
someone
thank you.
who wants to start with a portrait, what do you recommend, Ray, the subject, size of the painting, etc.?
Uh, well, a lot of people will try to do something really tiny, but it's really hard to do these washes on something that's really tiny. So I would not work on too small of a scale. This is actually much easier when I'm working in a bigger size. Uh, while you're learning, uh, don't I wouldn't try to do it like a commission, like with the intention of having to give it to somebody for Christmas or something like that. For your very first portraits, do one that you plan just to throw in the closet, right? And if it fails, it's a learning experience, right? And treat it like that. So because as soon as you become precious about, something and it's got to work out, you start to tighten up, and that's when things go wrong. Uh, but it's going to be a slow build in order to get to where you want to go. Patience is the number one thing. If you are doing a portrait for the very first time, uh, like a child with like a hood up will mean that you won't have to do all that hair. Although it's good, you'll have a little bit showing where you have to kind of deal with it. Uh, you might not want to do your first portrait with a great big grinny smile. Now, as I said, I have some YouTubes where I've just painted a smile, just to show you how to do teeth and that sort of thing. So do practice those things for sure. But do you want to do your very first portrait and take it all on at once? Probably not. Um, a profile's probably easier. You don't have to match up two eyes. Just something where you can really practice this building, the sculpting of the face. I think that that would be the main thing that I'm looking for in a first-time portrait.
Fantastic, thanks. Another person says, Shelley, thank you so much for showing us how to create your beautiful painting. Do you
Thank you.
usually concentrate on the eyes later in the painting?
Well, as I said, I kind of developed the whole painting as all together, and until I have the entire area around the eye completed, I can't do those eyelashes. So those end up being at the end anyway. Uh, whether I want it or not, they still have to be at the end.
Wonderful. Okay. I'm not sure I understand this question. I'll read it and see if it makes sense. Perhaps whoever Zoom user is, they could fill us in. What color palette should be used for wheat is skin and dark eyes? Wheatish.
Wheat-ish. Okay, so
I'm
more
not
of an
sure I
olive
understand that.
complexion, probably. You could use pretty much the same combination. You can introduce a little bit of burnt sienna if you need to, although you can mix something pretty close with the combination that I gave you here. You may just end up needing to use a little bit more of the raw sienna, if that
Okay,
answers
that
your
makes sense.
question.
Okay, I'm looking for another question. Beautiful comments, compliments as well. When building up, would you re-wet the painting and add layers?
For sure, yes. I won't, if I really wanted to smooth this out a little bit, sometimes, and this goes for a wash, like if it was a landscape and I had a sky and I had some brush marks in it or something like that, I would re-wet that. You're not going to do that after you have eyelashes and stuff, details on there, but if you're just at the stage where you're just trying to finish up the skin tones, you can definitely re-wet it. And that just softens up the paint that's on the paper and helps it to sort of melt together. And then you can add a little bit more at that point or not. But that all has to happen before you put on any of your details.
If there's anybody out there that would like to ask a question, please unmute and you can just ask Shelley. She'll be happy to
Yeah,
answer if you'd like.
and I'll put my other screen up.
All so quiet tonight.
Yeah. You don't have to keep me on
I'll put, okay, there's everybody. Some we have no pictures, but sure, unmute if you have a question.
You have, excuse me, do you have a special site that we could go into and see what?
well, you can go to my website. Well, my website was up there the whole time. Like
Just a minute. Just a minute.
right here at the top is
Yeah.
my website.
Okay.
And I have on my website, I have a page called Free Online Demos. And there's a listing of them, and it's just basically a click and go. And my YouTube videos are done live Wednesday mornings. So I was doing one this morning. And I do them pretty much every week unless I've got a class or something that's going on. But if every week when I can, I'm doing a live demo, and I've got a number of them on people, hair, teeth, eyes, etc. Or even, I did one of my daughter that was one week it was the blonde hair, and the next week it was her face. So you can sort of see a repeat and it applied in a different way from any of those. But that's where you look, and it's called Free Online Demos.
If you are going on YouTube, Dave Corlett has put in the chat, if you scroll back up to the top, near the top of the chat, you'll see the URL, the link to Shelley's YouTube.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, www.youtube.com/@ Shelley Prior Fine Art, all one word.
Yeah.
I just checked them out on YouTube. There's so many there. They're fantastic. And I looked at your still lifes. I'm absolutely amazed at what you've done with glass.
Thank
Phenomenal.
you. Thank you. I started during COVID, like everybody else, I guess. My first videos were pretty rough. I didn't have very good equipment, and I was very awkward talking to a camera. But I eventually got used to it and got better equipment and everything. So now I've accumulated well over 200 of
Wow.
those videos, not including the recorded ones that are unpublished because they were Zoom workshops. So I have a listing of Zoom workshops on my website as well. Those are paid. You get a line drawing, you get a reference picture, you get progress photos. Like I take photos all the time I'm doing it, and you get the recorded video.
Can't wait
So,
to check them out. That's great.
yeah. Thank you.
It's like a treasure opening up, isn't it?
Yeah.
Another question from Lisa. What is your opinion on backgrounds, if you use them, when in the process do you begin to integrate them?
Oh, very good question. Yes. In terms of the background, I would wet right into her hair in order to apply the background because the one thing that will spoil uh, all this softness, and I'm just going to go back to the picture here for a second. The one thing that's going to spoil all this softness is to have a helmet head, a hard line here. So when you wet, you're going to wet from the background all the way into the hair. And then, of course, you're going to paint only up to the hairline, but that's going to keep that edge very soft. And if it doesn't soften, you're going to use this brush and soften it so that there's not going to be a very crisp line there. So sometimes I'll do it ahead of time, but it doesn't matter if my hair bleeds into the background, if the background bleeds into the hair. To me, that doesn't matter. That other example I showed you, this one here, where's the back of her head? You can't even tell, right? So it just disappears. One blends into the other, and it doesn't matter because that's not the focal point. Even the back of her hair here, and you can see it's not all that tiny, or it's not all that polished. There's brush marks on her shoulder. So, I put a lot of emphasis on keeping it very youthful, very like almost airbrush looking. But you can still get a successful painting even if you have a few brush marks or blossoms in it. Like, don't panic if you get a few of those. So you'll be fine.
Awesome, thanks. Oh, so many nice comments. Any other questions?
Just a comment, you're so professional and thorough and
Thank you.
accessible or approachable and natural. That's the word.
Thank you.
Yeah, really a pleasure.
So Jody, maybe you'd like to pull things together here before we stop?
Yep. Well, I think, Shelley, what you did showed us, how to begin and how you build it up and how you incorporate the drawing and then all the shadows and keep building and keep layering. And then the picture you showed us of the other baby where was complete. We can imagine now all the layering it took to give that finished look. But that was very, very helpful for some of us who don't know where to begin. So, and we appreciate your tips on how to start if we haven't started painting portraits of children yet, what to consider in a composition. So this was very helpful and very different for us. So I think everybody really appreciated it.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you liked it.
Yep.
Okay, so thanks everybody for coming. This is being recorded and I'm going to stop recording now.